What we're learning in this video is how to graph lines using the slope-intercept equation. Now, anytime we have the y isolated in a line equation where we have y equal to something x plus a number, this is in slope-intercept. This number over here is the y-intercept. And the coefficient that's in front of the x, this is the slope. Now, the y-intercept is our starting point. Now, I want you to understand that this is the y-intercept, meaning that the starting point for an equation in this form will always be somewhere on the y-axis. So in this case, it's going to be at -4. So what we want to do is we want to count four boxes, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we want to draw a dot. Now, the slope is the direction that we go after this initial point. So if I have 2/3, 2 tells me, the numerator, how far up to go, and 3 tells me how far to the right to go. So in this case, what we're doing is we're going 2 up and 3 to the right. And that gives me my second point of my line. And we can draw a line by drawing a line that goes directly through these 2 points. Now, in this problem over here, it's a little bit different because our slope is negative. So let's see how we deal with that. So first, let's start with our starting point. Our starting point is 2 on the y-intercept. So 1, 2. And from that point, what we're going to do is we're going to move 1 down and 4 to the right. I always put the negative on top. That way, it determines whether we go up or down. And I always leave the denominator positive, so I'm always going right. So over here, we're going to go 1 down. And then we're going to go 4 to the right. That'll give us our second point, and then we draw the line. Now, these problems are slightly different from our previous problems because if we look at the slopes are integers. So over here it's a 3, over here it's a fraction, and over here it's a fraction. So let's see how we can deal with that. Now, first, let's start with our starting point. That's always this constant at the end. So we're going to start with -4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then when we look at the slope, we're going to look at it as 3 over 1. We can change any integer into a fraction by just putting a 1 underneath it. So that means that we're going to go 3 up, 1 to the right. So from here, we're going to go 3 up, 1 to the right, and that gives me my new point. Now, the meaning of slope is that every time I go 1 over to the right, this is how far up or down that we go. So in this case, even from this point, we'll go up 3 over 1. And then from the next point, we'll go up 3 over 1. So you'll get sort of the staircase kind of effect if you keep applying the slope to the last previous point. So let's draw a line. Now, in the same way over here, we can put a 1 underneath the -2 when we deal with our slope. But the other problem here is that we have no y-intercept. Now, even though it's not there, it's there. If it's not written, the y-intercept is 0. Because if I simplify this equation, I would get our original equation. So whenever the the y-intercept is not written, the origin, right, 0 on the y-axis, is always on our line. Now from here, we're going to go down 2, right 1. So we're going to go down 2, right 1, and that gives us our second point. And just like I showed before, what the slope means in this case is that every time I take one step to the right, I'm always going down 2. And again, you'll get that sort of staircase effect. Okay. Now, let's say I have a problem like this. This problem here is not written in slope-intercept form. So what I have to do is convert it into slope-intercept form. I need this to look like y is equal to something x plus something. So the first thing we need to do is get rid of this 4x because we're isolating the y. So let me subtract 4x from both sides. Now notice that you cannot remove 4x from 6 because there's no x there. So we just write them separately. These are not like terms. They are not the same thing. There's no x here, so we can't combine them. Now after this, I'm going to divide each term by 2. And now I have y is equal to minus 2x plus 3. So my starting point is positive 3. From here, I'm going to go 2 down, 1 to the right. And there we go. Now, just know, sometimes your problems will have a y in it. Sometimes they'll have an f of x. Just understand that whether it's written as y is equal to something or if f of x is equal to something, they mean the same thing. You would draw the same graph. Y and f of x can be interchanged anytime you like. Okay, now, if I'm having a bad day, I'm going to give you this problem. Now, let's isolate the y again. So I'm going to subtract the x, subtract the x. Sorry, that's a minus x over here. And we get 2y is equal to minus x plus 9. And then we're going to divide both of these by 2. So now I get y is equal to negative 1/2 x. Now notice that even though the 1's not written there, it's there. And I'm going to write this in as a mixed number. Now the way I got the 4.5 is I divide 2 into the 9. The 2 goes into the 9 4 times with a remainder 1. And then I bring the 2 over. Okay, and that gives me 4.5. Now, the reason why we do this is that even though it's a fraction, this is still the y-intercept. So I want to find where 4.5 is on the y-axis. And remember that 4 is in between 4 and 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 5. So I'm going to be right in between. Okay, because that's what 4.5 is. So anytime you get a fraction, just change it into a mixed number and just sort of guesstimate. Now, from here, we have negative 1/2. That means that we're going to go down 1, right 2. We're going to go down 1, right 2. And then we'll draw a line. Now, the last kind of lines that we're going to try to graph are line equations that have only one variable. So we're not going to use the slope-intercept in this case. What we're going to do is plot points. Now, when this says x equal 2, it means that no matter what my y value is, x is always equal to 2, and y can be anything because it doesn't even mention y. Y has no constraint. So I would just pick easy numbers like 0, 1, 2. And when we graph these points, I get 2, 0, 2, 1, 2, 2. And if we join these points together, we'll get a vertical line. Now, usually I teach my students that the easiest way to graph this is to just say, go through the x-axis at 2. So this tells me x-axis and go through it at 2. In the same way, when I have something like this tells me go through the y-axis at 3. So here's 3, here's the y-axis, and we're going to go through it and draw a horizontal line. So anytime you have only one variable, you're always going to have either a vertical line or a horizontal line. Now, the thing to pay attention to is that usually when we think X, we think horizontal, and usually when we think Y, we think vertical, but this is actually the opposite, so it shouldn't fit your intuition. That's why I use the memory mnemonic of go through the x-axis at 2 and go through the y-axis at 3. Now, if you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe so other people can find it. Thank you.